Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AAS YouTube channel. And this one is going down the Scientific Editor series. And I'm very happy to have Scientific Editor and Associate Editor-in-Chief, Butler Burton, with us today. Hey, Butler.
Hello, Frank. How are you?
I am doing quite well today on this mid-February day. It's a little chillier than normal in Phoenix. Probably not as chilly as where you are, which is where?
I'm at 52 degrees north latitude, 4 degrees east longitude, quite close to the beaches of the North Sea in the university town of Leiden in the Netherlands. And if you ask me what the weather's like here, I've heard you say that the weather in Phoenix is often 35 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
I worked for a number of years at the University of Minnesota and would travel to Kitt Peak to observe on Kitt Peak. And if someone would complain about it being 35 degrees from freezing in Kitt Peak, I could say, well, it's 35 degrees from the freezing point of water in Minnesota right now.
Oh, you absolutely win the prize for anybody who's more or less given their latitude and longitude approximate
Yes.
for where they're at. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I see well, it's not Kitt Peak, but I see a scope over your right shoulder there. What is that?
That's just a spotting scope. That's not, it's very difficult to use for astronomical purposes for two reasons. One, it jiggles all the time. And the other is I live where the stars are seldom shining. So I think the easiest job in the world would be a Dutch weather forecaster. They simply have to memorize the sentence, drizzle with occasional dry intervals, and say that 10 times a day, and there you are.
That is amazing.
But I did have a good computer-driven 8-inch Celestron. But I gave it to the Leiden Observatory to use on the roof of the old observatory because it was simply not getting enough use in these conditions.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully they can use it for their courses or something along those lines. So
yes.
Very cool. That's a pretty awesome book collection behind you there. Is that all astronomy books?
No, that's astronomy and natural history.
Cool.
Natural history being like the life cycle of lobsters and of crabs and some travel books. I've got more books than I need, but these are the books in my office, and there's an equivalent number in 2 other rooms in the main house.
Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! That is great. Wow, very cool. Very cool. So Butler, what do you like to do for research in general?
I'm a radio astronomer.
Okay.
And so I do radio astronomy from ground-based observatories. I'm very happy to do survey work, and indeed a lot of what I've done has been survey work. Before we started, you were going to ask me what my first paper was in the AAS journals, and let me tell you about that first, if I can.
Yes, please.
And that was in the Astronomical Journal, and it was a paper entitled "The Proper Motion of 6 Wide Double Stars." Now, a paper with that title would not be given the time of day at the moment, with Gaia producing billions of proper motions. You don't want 6 more. But at the small college where I did my undergraduate degree, there was a 24-inch refractor.
Oh goodness! Wow.
Sproul Observatory at Swarthmore College.
Okay.
When that telescope was built in 1911, it was one of the largest telescopes in the world. That honor didn't last very long, and now, of course, it's of no relevance whatsoever. But even though my major at college was mathematics, not astronomy, I got a big kick out of being an observer on the telescope. The observers on the telescope were given 25 cents a plate. And the professor, Peter van de Kamp, made a list of stars to be looked at. These were all stars within a 50 AU or so of the sun. And some of these stars were fainter than others. And the brighter ones, you could make an exposure in 3 or 4 minutes. And the fainter ones, it would take you several hours of guiding carefully, all for 25 cents. And I enjoyed the challenge of picking the several hour exposures for my 21 cents and got very much the taste of astronomy, even though I was majoring in something else.
You developed the plates and all that?
No, I didn't develop the plates. The plates were glass plates about this size. They weren't Palomar Sky Atlas type plates. They were plates. I don't know exactly how big they were, 6 by 9 inches or something like that. But you had to guide carefully. And the guidance was done with 2 brass knobs. The brass knobs were for some reason about this big. And so they were too small to wear gloves in the winter. And for a 2-hour exposure in the winter, your fingers weren't much good afterwards, but that was all part of the challenge. And I enjoyed that very much. And I enjoyed the telescope. The telescope was unlike the telescopes I used after that. You could see what you were doing. The telescope had nothing electronic about it. It was driven by a weight. And the speed at which the weight dropped down through the pier was done by a governor, or two cannonballs going around like this. And indeed, I did frequently observe through outages of the electricity. You just carried on. I enjoyed that very much. One of the stars on my list was Barnard's star, star of largest proper motion. And this was the time at which Peter van de Kamp was just about to announce that Barnard's star had unseen companions, planets. And so I was in the neighborhood when this was going on. It was all very exciting. It was all wrong.
It's still exciting.
It was still exciting. It didn't take too long, although van de Kamp was reluctant to admit that this wasn't working. It didn't take too long to trace the probable cause of the apparent perturbation to a time when the 2 glass components of the refractor, the crown and the flint, were taken apart to be cleaned. And they had to be separated by a small gap. The story was, I'm not sure this was true, that it was a 1-penny stamp cut in 3 pieces when the thing was first made. When it was put back together, it was a stainless steel thing about that big, cut in 3 pieces. But the principal perturbation, which van de Kamp mistakenly interpreted as evidence for planets, probably stems from that.
Interesting.
But
very cool. Yeah, it reminds me. I actually have some photographic glass plates from Lick. I should trot those out because most people probably never seen a photographic plate.
Did you develop your plates yourself?
No. I tried observing once. I went up with Bob Kraft up to Lick and his grad students, and we were taking a look at Pleiades. I relatively quickly gathered that this was not my cup of tea. Although I loved going up to Lick, I like the idea of observing,
Yes.
but I'm just not very good at it. Particularly the reduction. It was just not me.
No, I very much enjoyed the observing. Even though I was a major in something else, there was the single professor at Swarthmore College, Peter Van de Kamp, was a very flamboyant, charismatic fellow. And so astronomy was in the air. And there were a number of people that came from this small college. I guess it had then about 1,000 students that went on to do real astronomy. Sandy Faber, who just won the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society. John Mathis, who got a Nobel Prize in physics for his work on the infrared satellites. Bruce Drain, who knows more about dust than anybody else in the world. So there was astronomy in the air. And Van de Kamp, although he was doing this terribly old-fashioned astrometry, even then it was really old-fashioned. The word computer was a 4-letter word in his vocabulary. He was great friends with well-known astronomers. So I got to know as an undergraduate Bart Bach and Martin Schwarzschild and Brent Stromgren, and these people would come by and we'd be introduced to them, and it made a big impression on me.
So you went on from doing 6 stars to doing surveys, radio surveys.
Yes, I went to graduate school in Leiden, which was not long after the Dwingelow 25-meter telescope, which also at one point had been the largest radio telescope in the world. Very, very, very briefly. But it was doing survey work, 21-centimeter survey work, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed collecting the data ourselves as students. There were students who did the observing mostly. We got free lunch, but didn't get 25 cents a spectrum. Although it took us sometimes just about as long to get a single spectrum in those days as it would have if it had been an optical telescope. And so my thesis work was on neutral hydrogen in the plane of the Milky Way. And those first publications were not done in the LDS journals either. They were done first in the Astronomical Institutes of the Netherlands, which quickly merged with other national journals to become Astronomy and Astrophysics. So my first 8 or 10 years of my publications were in Astronomy and Astrophysics.
Cool. Very cool.
I had gone to Leiden. I hadn't anticipated doing graduate work in the Netherlands. After I graduated from Swarthmore, I applied to American graduate schools. I was just about set to go off to Yale, where I'd been accepted, when Jan Oort, the quite well-known Dutch astronomer, was giving a colloquium at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. This would have been in April of my last year at college. And Peter Van de Kamp said, "Here's another famous astronomer. Why don't you go listen to his colloquium?" And his colloquium was going to be about spiral structure. Spiral structure was the hot number at the time. One of Oort's most famous graduate students, Lo Volcher, was at the Institute of Advanced Studies then, and he had invited C.C. Lin, the theorist, applied mathematics theorist from MIT, to come meet Oort so they could talk about what might be causing spiral structure, or at least maintaining spiral structure. So Van de Kamp said, "Why don't you go over to Princeton and listen to this colloquium?" Now, in those days, students at Swarthmore were not allowed to have cars. We're not allowed to have alcohol. We're not allowed to have women in their rooms either, for that matter. Times do change.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a car, but Van de Kamp lent me his car. As I said, he was a flamboyant personality. So his car was a bright red Chevrolet convertible with white leather seats.
Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, I was easily impressed by things like that. I guess I still would be. But, so I got in this Chevrolet convertible, put the top down. It was one of the most beautiful early spring days, and drove over to Princeton. At the Institute of Advanced Study, the lecture hall then was one of these old-fashioned things, you know, with a steep lecture theater with wooden seats, and being someone who wasn't quite sure he belonged there or not, I went up in the back at the top and sat and was thrilled by what I was seeing, although I didn't quite know what I was watching, but I liked the idea. And then I changed my mind. I applied for a Fulbright grant, got one, and went off to Leiden, and ended up staying there for all of my graduate work. Searching for spiral structure with Hort as my thesis advisor.
Cool.
Didn't find spiral structure, and I rather have a jaundiced view about who has yet found spiral structure in our galaxy, although of course our galaxy is a spiral. All rapidly rotating gas-rich galaxies are spirals, but mapping it when you're sitting right in the midst of it is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. That was awesome. Wow. Wow. So,
and then I went off to, I mean, you had mentioned CO. Then I went off to
real life.
have 6 or so grandfather clocks that go chiming every now and then.
All good.
I was a postdoc at NRAO, and there I started to do CO observations on Kitt Peak, together with Mark Gordon, who he was later director of the radio telescope on Kitt Peak, and has been a lifelong friend of mine. And we, together with 2 graduate students, Jay Lockman and Tom Bania, who have both also remained good friends, made the first determination that CO was concentrated towards the inner galaxy, somewhat devoid of the innermost galaxy, quite weak compared to the H1 and the outer galaxy. And I continued the CO observations for quite a few years, going further on individual CO clouds with Harvey List, who was also at the NRAO, and became also a very good colleague and lifetime friend. We did these CO observations at Kitt Peak, and later at the JCMD, and compared the location of the CO clouds with absorption features in the H1 that we saw at Arecibo, and greatly enjoyed observing at Arecibo. These telescopes that I've mentioned, by the way, they don't exist anymore. Arecibo's fallen down. The Kitt Peak 36-foot, 12-meter is no longer functioning. The 300-foot telescope in Greenbank, which I worked on, also fell down.
Yep. Although that one got rebuilt.
That one certainly got rebuilt, and did it ever, indeed. But
well, cross fingers.
Going to these telescopes, I enjoyed the process of going to these ground-based telescopes. Now, maybe people watching this video are familiar with this book, which has recently come out, The Last Stargazers by Emily Levesque. It's about, by last stargazer, she means working at a ground-based telescope as opposed to working with Hubble or Chandra or Spitzer. And she describes in a way which I appreciate very much, the excitement of driving up the road to Kick Peak Mountain and sitting, twiddling the knobs at the telescope, or driving across the West Virginia mountains to Green Bank, where you also twiddle with the knobs yourself, or driving up to the mountain highlands of central Puerto Rico to observe at Arecibo. And that was, I think people who observe with spaceborne telescopes, of course, they're excited when their images land on their desk, but it's not quite the same as if you've struggled through nights of rain or clouds and gathered the data yourself. And in those days, one worked with maybe one or two colleagues, not with 50, 60 colleagues. And that makes it somehow more intimate too.
Indeed, definitely. As you've well documented, the evolution in the number of authors.
Yes, well, until the about 1970, most APJ papers had a single author.
Yeah. And
now we have APJ papers with 100 or 50 or 25, or very commonly with 10 or so authors. I think this reflects partly the complexity of the instrumentation, partly the complexity of the reduction procedures, but partly also that when you were the only author on a paper, or people older than we are was the only author on a paper, they didn't give appropriate credit to whoever had reduced the data or built the instrument or
the figures.
Yes.
Right. So let's see, if I remember your data right, in the current epoch, I think the percentage of single author papers is down, what, into the 2% range?
About 3%.
3%. Okay.
And it's gone down and it's leveled off there. Those 3% of the papers are written by just a couple of people. And when those couple of people are no longer here, maybe it will go down to less than 3%. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
For a new book, the last single author. Maybe we'll get Emily to write a book about that. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
Very good. Wow. So when did you become involved as a scientific editor for the AAS journals?
Well, it was 20 years ago. I did. Before that, I had been editor of book series put out in the Astronomy and Astrophysics Space, Astronomy and Space Science Library series, published first by Riedel Publishing Company in the Netherlands, then by Kluwer Academic Publishers, a international organization, and now by Springer. And this series, which I, beginning in about 1995, was the managing editor of this series, now has more than 500 titles. And I enjoyed that very much. Later, just 3 or 4 years ago, I was the initiating editor of a new series, the Historical and Cultural Astronomy, that deals with biographies and Aztec astronomy and Roman and Greek and Sicilian astronomy. But I no longer do this. When the AAS embarked on its ebook program, a pistol was held to my head, and so I no longer do that.
Well, we're gonna have to talk to Steve Qualler about this. Who I just talked to the other day. So, yeah, very good.
No, he didn't hold the pistol to my head. The AAS authorities were concerned about a conflict of interest.
Yes, understood. So you started being a scientific editor for the AAS journals, certainly under Rob.
In the year 2000, I did.
Okay, so that was Rob.
That was with Rob, yes, indeed. And so I think the only current science editor that's been on duty longer than I is Ethan Vishniak, who was a couple of years earlier than that.
Yeah.
And
so Judy started after you did? Judy Foster?
Yes, she did. A couple of years after I did.
Okay. Very good. And when did you become associate editor-in-chief?
That was in 2016, I think.
Okay. Okay.
About then, or was it before that?
I think it must.
I don't. No, it would have been before that. I could. Yeah. I could tell you it was probably 2006. I think there was a 6 of them.
Yes, that makes sense, because by the time I started in 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, you were already.
Yeah, it was 2006.
Yeah.
And my duties have changed because the whole process has changed, especially now that we have the corridors with the lead editors. When I started, manuscripts were distributed to the science editors once a week.
Yes.
And the arrangement that Ethan and I had was that he would distribute them on 3 of the weeks in a month, and I would distribute them on 1 of the weeks of the month. One of the things which hasn't changed is that when there are real problems, by problem I mean a scare about plagiarism or a scare about an ethical issue, or so then there's a committee of 2, Ethan and myself, usually with the science editor who's involved, making a commission of 3 who discuss the case and come to some sort of resolution or whatever. And very happily that this, very rarely happens. We very rarely have such problems, but when they do come up, that's one of the things that I do. I also, for quite some time, kept statistics on how many papers were being published, what countries they came from, what the affiliations were. A lot of that now is done by our publisher, IOP, and so I deal less with the formal aspects of things, but with the things which amuse me more, such as what percentage of the papers acknowledge the referees.
Yes.
And how many of the papers are written by a single author.
And what is that percentage of authors who think usually referee?
It's 50% now. And that's something which has changed too. Back in the day when papers were written by 1 or 2 people, the referees were not acknowledged.
Right.
Back in the day when the Astrophysical Journal was edited from start to finish, from soup to nuts by Chandrasekhar, I guess people didn't say, well, thanks Chandrasekhar for serving as referee. And I think also when the papers were written by only 1 author, they were so senior that perhaps they didn't find it necessary to thank the referee. But now it's fully half of the papers contain an acknowledgement to the referee. And when I'm the editor of a paper, I always check on acceptance if the referee has been thanked, and if the referee has been thanked, I always send a note to the referee, you have been thanked.
Cool.
And I also check, when I check the acknowledgements, to make sure that no one from the editorial board has been thanked, because that's against the rules.
Yeah.
For example, Greg Schwartz and Gus Munch often give input on how the data is to be stored, and Eric Feigelson gives his very useful editorial remarks on use of statistics.
Yes.
And authors are frequently very pleased with the help that they've gotten, but they're not allowed to say thank you to them. Otherwise, authors can do whatever they want with the acknowledgements. We don't mess with them at all.
Yes.
Within limits.
So, yes.
I won't discuss what the limits might be. I won't give examples of ones that go overboard.
No. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, though. So you're still a scientific editor. You still got your feet on the ground in the trench.
Yes.
So roughly, how many new submissions do you handle a week these days?
I handle about 4 or 5, which I think is what the other science editors do largely.
Yes.
The ones that I receive mostly come from the corridor, interstellar matter, and the local galaxies. Although occasionally I get one on radio astronomy instrumentation or from something else. But so I have about 5 a week.
So, steady state.
It's pretty much a steady state.
60 in various phases.
Yes.
So, cool.
Yeah, I think you have more on your plate at any given time than many of the others of us, but
yeah.
Yes, if I had a hat on, I would tip it to you, Frank.
It's fun. I enjoy it. So let's go into the let's give some advice for authors here. So, what do you think makes for a good initial submission that comes in when a manuscript comes in? What do you think makes for a solid submission going forward that will make it into the peer review process?
Oh, well, usually the gate that has to open before it enters the peer review process is something done either by our editor-in-chief or by Janice, the managing editor, when it's not written and the subject matter is completely out of the realm of what we cover.
Yes.
Or the manuscript preparation is written we use the example written in crayon on the back of a grocery bag or something. I mean, that doesn't make it through the initial gate. Otherwise, I wish all authors would be very careful to follow the instructions.
Okay.
Our instructions are quite explicit. The instructions say that you should, with papers with more than 5 authors, should not list all 100 authors in the bibliography, that they should use the standard journal abbreviations, which are used by the ADS system, that they should, that they should, if they reference an archive preprint, they should reference the journal to which it's been submitted, if it has been submitted. And sometimes the references to the archive preprint have in fact been published in a refereed journal. And authors should realize that archive is just a preprint. It's not a refereed product, which is permanently accessible, peer-reviewed.
Right.
And so I check every paper that comes in, I check, did you follow these instructions?
Okay.
We also check every paper that comes in, or this happens in our managing editor's office, Janice Sexton's, for plagiarism.
Text overlap. Yes.
Papers are run through a standard plagiarism checker that's used throughout scholarly publishing. It's the same one, Authenticate, and it flags pieces of text which have appeared somewhere else. When we introduced this, this piece of software, it was a reaction to some cases where there had been large blocks of text taken from somewhere else.
Yep.
Now, those large blocks of text taken from somewhere else were almost always taken from papers that the authors themselves had written.
Right.
They just didn't realize that that was not a good idea. Very rarely were they taken from papers that somebody else had written, although that did occasionally happen. But nowadays, since people realize what we're doing, happens much more rarely. And since submissions from countries where English is not the first language, their language is becoming much better, so they can't use the statement, well, but someone said it so much nicely, I couldn't say it any better, so let me just cut and paste.
Right. Yep. That has definitely gone down. Yep. So do you have any advice for, let's take a look at it from both sides. From the author side, do you have any advice, guidance, tips for authors during the peer review process?
Well, they should follow instructions that are posted on our websites. They should realize that the peer review process is being carried out by referees who are volunteers, who are doing it for the love of the science and because they're aware that their own papers are going to be sent off to a referee, and so it's their duty, and I hope they consider it their duty, to occasionally act as referees.
Yes.
So it occasionally happens that an author, and these are usually first-time authors or authors without all that much experience with the peer review process, sometimes authors with a very inflated idea of their own merits, object to the referee, and you should never object to the referee. If they make a statement, a criticism which you think is silly,
yes,
then you must respond to it. The editor is not going to just set that criticism aside. You can respond to it and say, I don't think the referee quite got the point or understood what I was trying to say, and so I will not be able to take that criticism of the referee into account. That's all right. That's perfectly all right. But you have to give it some attention.
Yes, that I agree with. Yep.
Another thing which some authors don't do as much as they perhaps should do. There's nothing wrong with if the referee is taking longer than we would hope the referee would take to respond. The author can write a note and say, oh, I'd expected to find the referee's report by now. Can you do something about it? And indeed, our heroic Janice and her assistants send reminders to referees, but after one or two reminders from the referees have gone out, many of the science editors send a personal note to the referee and say, don't you think, can you really please do your best to get your report in? But it does nothing wrong for the author. I don't object at all to the author saying, where's the referee's report? No,
it's okay. It's fine. It's perfectly. Please do it, people.
And authors should realize that the delay from submission to publication, that delay budget is largely caused by the authors themselves taking a long time to get around to revising their paper.
We do give 6 months.
And then they got yes, I had a case a moment ago, a couple of days ago, where I had reminded the author of that 6-month limit. And they said, well, it's 6 months, 6 calendar months or 180 days. And indeed, there is an inconsistency because we get flagged when it's 180 days. They think they've got 6 calendar months.
Yes.
Usually,
Yes,
by the way, I think we deal with more important issues than that. But
no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I will typically start bugging people at day 150 is my litmus. So basically 1 month out.
Good.
I start inquiring about the status of manuscript. Just 183 is a policy limit, so you're at risk of being withdrawn. Please reply. I would say I get about 95% replies from authors who will say, "Yeah, we're working on it," or we'll make it by the 6-month deadline calendar, or 180, 183 days, whatever it may be.
Okay, well that's good. I will accept your challenge to be more aggressive, because I usually wait till Janice and her friends have sent out a couple of reminders, and then I get on it. But,
yeah, I get on that a little bit early when I remember to do it. I think the longest I've ever had, somebody wanted some extra extension, and this was not pandemic related, or even transferring a position related. I think my longest one has been about 8-9 months, and that was about 2 years ago. 9 months before the revision came in.
Now, it used to be that the central office, Janice's office, would keep track for each of the SEs of how long their papers were in the pipeline. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
And that was not secret knowledge.
No.
At least not secret knowledge outside of the cohort of editors.
Right.
And that was a stimulus when you saw that, well, some other people are speedier than I am. Well, then you put your nose to the grindstone again. But I don't know why that hasn't happened recently. I'd be happy to encourage Janice to do that.
Yeah, we got out of that habit a couple of years ago of showing those statistics. I don't know why, but okay. Maybe it's time to revisit that. So let's take a look at it from the other side of the coin. So what do you think makes for a good referee report, especially the initial referee report?
A good referee, first of all, accepts the challenge of serving as referee and accepts it as soon as they get the request.
Yes.
And they can't always accept it, and they not infrequently have very good reasons that they've just gone off on maternity leave, or they're refereeing, just got a request to referee for a sister journal, or sometimes there's a conflict of interest which we haven't noticed, although we try very hard to notice if there's a conflict of interest. We don't pick referees working at the same institution. We don't pick referees who have clearly written papers recently with one of the authors. So often they're good reasons. So a good referee, we would hope, would accept the challenge and then would provide the report within the allotted time. And that frequently happens. And a good referee report is written in a constructive manner.
Good, yes.
Even if critical.
Yes.
Thorough, timely, thoughtful, constructive. If I get a referee report that is thorough, timely, constructive, and thoughtful, when I thank the referee for the report, I use just those words. Thank you for the thorough, thoughtful, timely report.
Yep.
And I don't know whether the referees know it. Don't even know whether it's public knowledge, but we give the referees a rating.
We do.
We do. Is that public knowledge? I'm not quite sure.
It is now.
It is now. And so also when we choose a referee, we can see how often they've refereed, and that's useful because you don't want to ask a referee to serve several times within
26 times a year,
a few month period. We also see whether they've have been reluctant in agreeing to referee. That usually doesn't stop me from asking them again.
No, it doesn't stop me either.
And when I ask a referee, I say, I try the old flattery trick saying, you've written so extensively on this subject.
Good.
Well,
yes.
So referees should be constructive and positive. They should be persistent if they think that in the revision, the authors are not giving adequate attention to their critique. They should say so.
Yes.
And referees should realize, I hope, just how much they're appreciated, because some journals try to find ways to reward.
Yes.
Either by giving a pin or the American Physical Society works very differently with their referees. They have a basket full of people that are used, not the entire community, but a group of people. And those people are given pins or some other recognition. We don't do that. We expect every publishing astronomer to be considered as a candidate referee.
Yep.
Twice a year. I myself rarely, not never, but rarely burden a graduate student with a request to referee. Although I know the reasons that you can do that, because the graduate students on a particular subject might be the experts on the topic at the moment.
Right.
But I try to avoid that.
Okay.
And I try to check whether the referee has, as I said, jointly written papers with this person.
I guess that's part of due diligence up front. Yes.
Yeah. And it's a time-consuming process to pick a referee, and it doesn't always happen that the first person you go to agrees to take on the chore, nor does it always happen that the second person you go to is available for the chore either. But,
yeah, particularly for, there can be challenging manuscripts, either because the community is really small.
Yes.
And there's only just a handful of people who could possibly referee it. So that's on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, here's looking at you, LIGO, Ice Cube,
with
where you have thousands of authors, and they've basically slurped up the entire field, and it can be very challenging to find referees for those as well.
Yes, so, hundreds of authors at hundreds of different institutions.
Yeah, those are lovely to do. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Good. So do you have anything else you'd like to share about the editorial process as practiced by the AAS journals these days?
I would say it runs rather smoothly. It's a chore.
Yeah.
Chore for the referees, chore for us. It's something which not all authors are happy with. It would be easier just to drop things on the archive, but don't forget, authors, that's not peer reviewed. That's not part of the permanent record. Right. That's not copy edited.
Yep. Good housekeeping seal. What was your first experience with scientific research with an astronomical tinge, implying that there were other tinges going on?
Well, I have to tell you about a very exciting piece of scientific research. I was 10, maybe 12 years old. My mother was a fanatic birder, and the Audubon Club was doing an inventory of some sort of bird. I don't remember which type it was, but that migrated at night. So I was set out in the... Sorry, I have a collection of clocks.
It's 5 o'clock there.
I was set out in a lawn chair in the front yard with a pair of binoculars and a clipboard, large circle drawn on the clipboard, and I was to mark a vector every time a bird flew across the face of the full moon.
Okay.
And after a specified time, these clipboards, because there were quite a few people partaking in this research, were collected, vectors counted, directions counted, and presumably extrapolated from the area covered by the full moon to the area covered by the sky. And there were things to be learned about the migratory habits, the number of this particular type of goose or whatever it was. Now, I don't know what the referee said or whether it was published, but what I do remember very clearly is that, hey, this is something real. I'm doing research. And I had a great deal of a real sense of excitement by that.
Cool.
And I would hope that our authors continue to have a real sense of excitement about what they do. It's a lot of work to become a professional astronomer. It takes a lot of time, a lot of commitment. The commitment's there, otherwise people wouldn't go through the effort. I remember what Bart Bach told me when I was an undergraduate, and the calculation still holds. There are 3.5 million people in the United States, something like that. There's 7,000 members of the American Astronomical Society, of which about half are research astronomers. Mm-hmm. So a little bit of arithmetic shows you that we're 1 in a million. Yep. And I think authors and referees should realize that they're very privileged to be able to do what they're doing. And what they owe for this privilege is excitement and commitment and fun.
And communication to the public.
Yes, that's right. After all, I mean, the public's paying in one way or another.
Key component. It's one reason why we're doing these videos.
Good work, Frank. Good work.
All right. So the astronomy projects that you've done, did you have any that were surprising?
Yeah, I had a couple that surprised me. I think I mentioned earlier that the Dwingelo 25-meter telescope had started out as the largest radio telescope in the world, but by the time the 90s came along, it was ready for the scrap heap, bulldozed down. Since it had no real obvious use, it was given to us to use nonstop for a couple of years if we struggled with it.
Okay.
For the large survey of the whole sky survey of galactic hydrogen, Dop Hartmann, graduate student, deserves the credit for doing that. But in the process, we were aware of the zone of avoidance and wondered whether there might be things lurking behind the zone of avoidance, this path along the Milky Way, which is obscured from distant view because of interstellar dust, smog, gas. And indeed, in 94, we came across a blip in the spectra that didn't belong there. Okay. And we, in the 21 centimeter spectra, contacted friends and colleagues at the WISE Observatory in Israel and at the Isaac Newton Telescope on the Canary Islands. And it turned out to be a barred spiral galaxy, never before seen. Oh, cool. We named it Dwingelo 1.
There you go. Yes.
And it's 10 million light years away, so it's just in our own backyard. And a couple of years later, Robert Brown and I were investigating this same Dwingelo survey for class of very compact high velocity clouds, and we came across a very compact object where it didn't belong. And we asked our previous graduate student, Rene Walterbotz, then at the New Mexico State University, to look at it, which he did with the Apache Point telescope. And that was a low surface brightness galaxy, 20 million light years away, that hadn't been seen before. And what was fun about these two galaxies, I found fun, was that Dwingelo 1 would have been, without the zone of avoidance, one of the 10 brightest galaxies on the sky. And Cepheus 1, the other one, the low surface brightness galaxy, would have been one of the 10 largest galaxies on the sky.
Wow. And
so it was a lot of fun to do this. We were surprised. I mean, it hadn't set out to say, let's find one of the 10 brightest galaxies on the sky. It popped up by good luck.
Where does the name Dwingelo come from?
Dwingelo is the name of the village where the telescope was built.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Cool.
In English, it's sometimes pronounced Dwingeloo, and the press release on this discovery and reached the front pages of the London Times with off-color remarks about this Loo galaxy.
Yeah, that didn't appear in the referee article, I'm sure. Very cool. So speaking of referee journal articles, referee reports come in. And so I'm curious how you, either as an author or as a scientific editor, handle negative reports.
Well, let me tell you, since we're talking about personal experiences, let me tell you about a negative report that I got where I did not treat it the way I would hope our modern authors would treat it. I was fresh out of graduate school, hadn't had that much experience, and was doing an experiment together with a graduate student, Tom Bania, who's now gone on to be a distinguished professor at Boston University. We looked at the patterns in the kinematics of the neutral hydrogen in the plane of the galaxy, in the outer galaxy, looking towards the outer galaxy. In the outer galaxy, you have no direct indication of distance. And we compared these patterns with patterns that showed up in OB stars and H2 region tracers for which there were spectroscopic indications of distances. And if we wiggled the H1 patterns to match the patterns for which distances were known, we came to the conclusion that the rotation curve in the outer part of the galaxy would be substantially flatter than Keplerian. Now, let me attach a date to this. This was 1974. Vera Rubin had already in 1970 noticed that the rotation curves were flat in the outer parts of a number of spiral galaxies. Nothing had been done in our own galaxy, so this would have been the first indication that our own galaxy had a flattish rotation curve. The referee said, well, you must be nuts if you never heard of Kepler.
Is that a quote? That was in the referee report, nuts?
No, and furthermore, it was Astronomy and Astrophysics, not the Astrophysical Journal. So.
Okay.
Now, what I did was to tone down the paper. The remark's still in the paper, but it's toned down and satisfied the referee. And this is a case where I think it would have been wise if I had protested a bit. And I hope our authors realize that although they have to pay attention to every single remark of the referee, they don't have to do every single thing the referee says. They can tell why they don't want to do something, and then the science editor will take a look at it and say whether they agree or not. And in some cases, doesn't happen all that often, but in some cases, you can ask for a second referee. And so I would encourage authors to not forget that they can do something like that, and don't water a conclusion down which you really feel fairly confident of yourself, or perhaps even worse, don't just put the whole thing in a drawer and go on to something new. Yes,
that would be worse.
Yeah, and I've done that too. I've put unfinished projects in a drawer just because I wasn't quite sure how to proceed. I'm not sure whether I mentioned this earlier in our video, but I was using the 300-foot telescope in Green Bank to observe the moon in the 21 centimeter line. The beam of the 300-foot telescope is smaller than the full moon, and the column depth of interstellar hydrogen between Green Bank, West Virginia, and the moon is negligible. And yet the signal is not negligible because of stray radiation bouncing off of feed support legs, bouncing off of the surrounding mountains, coming up from the ground somewhere. And I made an initial set of observations, but I didn't follow up on it. After all, if you steer the telescope to a different part of the sky, you'll get a different contribution to the stray radiation. It's not trivial, you know, it can be 10 or 15% of the signal for weak signals.
Okay.
And in modern era, you take this into account, but I never followed it up. I should have followed it up. I put it in a drawer. So I would advise authors, don't do that. Bring it to completion.
Yes, and if somehow you're still not convinced yourself you're going to finish it off, we also have a new venue these days, which is Research Notes, which can often be a nice place for some of those things you might want to stick in a drawer or not quite get to, and just write up what you got and revisit it at some later date with a fuller exposition when the time permits. So yeah, very cool. So speaking of modern day authors, do you have any advice for our younger cohort of authors and referees?
Well, I've just given two.
Yeah.
Don't give up if you really believe in it. Don't put it in a drawer if you're just too lazy to have, or to can't find time to carry it through. But one thing that I hope for, and I don't think the advice is really there necessary, because you see that the authors do really, in almost all cases, appreciate the role of the referees. An author, after all, has worked hard to prepare this paper. They've studied hard, they've gotten funding, they've gotten observing time, they've gotten the data, they've reduced the data, they've analyzed the data, and so they consider that cake fully baked and ready for consumption. And the referee will come back and say, no, you need to decorate it with a cherry on top, or you need to do something else. And in almost all cases, the referee's right. I mean, the referee has chosen to be an expert in the field of the paper in front of them.
Yes.
And referees know that their own papers are going to be refereed, and so almost all referees are very careful. I mean, they're volunteers. They know that their rewards will not be on earth, but in heaven. And I think more and more authors realize this. I've done some statistics on the acknowledgements, number of papers that get an acknowledgement to the referee, and it's more than half. But interestingly enough, it's not just thanks to the referee. We're very grateful for the very constructive criticism that led to a substantial improvement in our paper. I mean, they realize that this is all part of the process, and it's part of the process which should be welcomed, I think.
Yep.
And I if they do come back with a graceful acknowledgement, I pass it on to the referee.
Oh, great, good.
I just had a case this morning, as a matter of fact, where a paper had been accepted a few days ago, and the corresponding author wrote and said, wait, hold up production. My co-author said, we didn't thank the referee, and we really want to do it. And so that's being inserted as we speak, that acknowledgement.
Yep, because the goal of the peer review process is to improve a manuscript and bring it to publication.
Yes.
So, very good.
And I think authors should know that it never happens. In my experience, it's only happened once in maybe 5,000 cases, that a referee says, oh, this is fine. No comment. That never happens.
Okay.
So the referees take the job very seriously too.
They do, generally.
Yeah,
Sometimes I've gotten below par referee reports where clearly there was not enough effort.
I'm not, is it public knowledge that we rate our referees?
Yeah.
It's public knowledge, okay, because we can give a referee good, very good, excellent, fair, poor, and never use again.
Which are rare, people, which are rare.
Very, very, very rare.
Very rare. But it does happen. Some people just, yeah. People are people. Very good. Okay, Butler, I want to thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on your astronomy and the peer review processes practiced by the AAS journals.
And thank you, Frank, for having these videos that are aimed at our colleague authors and colleague referees.
Absolutely.
Very nice service. Yep.
Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.